Hi, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to start with talking about the nervous system and neurotransmitters today. And I apologize in advance, my computer is going a little bit slow, so bear with me. Okay, so you should have some familiarity by now with the brain and with neurons. And after today's activity, just know a little bit more about the body's nervous system and how they work together to essentially control our entire bodies and act in response to signals sent from the brain. So just a quick review of the neuron. I'm not going to go through all of these definitions. You should know these pretty well by now, but if not, feel free to copy those down. So here we have dendrites, or the tree branchy things on the outside of the cell body, and they receive messages from other cells. The messages come in, they're processed through the cell body, which contains this little pea-sized thing here in the middle, the nucleus. Another word for cell body is the soma. The messages, or the neural impulses, are processed down and sent through the axon, and it's sent away from the cell body towards the terminal branches and into other neurons. Of course, the neural impulse is the electrical signal that travels down the axon. The myelin sheath is the fatty cells that encase the axon, and it helps speed up the neural impulses. And I think I compared this in the last video to, if you've seen Christmas Vacation, Chevy Chase's character Clark has a sled, and he sprays it with this new cooking spray, and it makes it go super fast down the hill. And it goes so fast that his sled catches on fire. And essentially this is what myelin does. It's the same thing. It makes those neural impulses travel fast like Clark's sled did. So, and then we reach the terminal branches, and this is what almost touches but not quite touches other neurons, and the messages go through the terminal branches, jump the synaptic gap, and travel through to the next neuron. Okay, so here we've talked about a little bit about the synapse, and this is a more textbook definition if you want, but if you look here at the picture, you can see this is a gap between the terminal branches and between the receptors of the dendrites, where the neurotransmitters jump the synaptic gap and enter into the next neuron. So neurotransmitters are essentially chemical messengers that traverse the synaptic gaps between neurons, and when they're released by the sending neuron, they travel across the synapse and bind to receptor sites on the receiving neuron, and they influence whether or not it will generate a neural impulse. So neurotransmitters have a say in whether or not they are carried through the chain of messages. We'll get into excitatory and inhibitory as we move a little bit further in the presentation. But neurotransmitters can also send a signal as to whether or not they move on through the chain. So we're going to talk about some common neurotransmitters and their functions. The first one we have is acetylcholine, and that enables muscle action, learning, and memory. And in case of a malfunction, there would be an undersupply, and acetylcholine producing neurons deteriorate, which is a mark of Alzheimer's disease. The brain with Alzheimer's disease essentially looks withered, and it's a degenerative disease where the brain actually shrinks in size, and the neurons and the nerves and the brain itself just degenerate and kind of start to shrivel up. There's a great link on the website that you can use to take a tour of the brain and compare a brain that's functioning normally with one that is affected by Alzheimer's. So acetylcholine is involved there. The second one we have here is dopamine, and that influences movement, learning, attention, and emotion. And excessive dopamine receptor activity is linked to schizophrenia, so it's a disorder we'll talk more about in the later units. When there is a lack of dopamine, the brain produces tremors and decreased mobility, which is also a mark of Parkinson's disease. So these first two neurotransmitters, with Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease, there's no cure. but there's a way to manage or to kind of slow down the process, at least in the case of Alzheimer's disease. But there is no cure for having a lack or an excess of these two neurotransmitters in your body, but it can be managed. The third one here, serotonin, affects mood, hunger, sleep, and arousal. An undersupply is linked to depression. And Prozac and some of the other antidepressant drugs you might have heard of raise serotonin levels, and when you're able to balance out that supply, then the idea is that the depression will be treated. Of course, if we think like a psychologist and we think, okay, well, we believe that maybe behavior or maybe genetics or maybe environment influence disorders. So we might say, yes, we're going to prescribe Prozac to our patient that has depression, but we're also going to work on treating behavioral issues and helping our patient control issues in the environment, and attributing some of this to genetics and things that might not be able to be changed permanently but can be treated. So drugs are not always 100% a cure-all. There are definitely more than one factor involved in things as complex as depression. So be careful not to associate low levels of serotonin as a primary cause of depression. Definitely plays a role, but if we think like a psychologist, we know that there are other roles based on the contemporary perspectives we've talked about. So let's move on to norepinephrine here, and this is a neurotransmitter that helps control alertness and arousal. An undersupply can also depress your mood. GABA, wow, it's a mouthful. Gamma-aminobutyric acid is the major inhibitory neurotransmitter. And we know, if we look at the word inhibitory, we can see the root word inhibit, which you might be a little bit more familiar with or more understanding of, and you could be able to, maybe if you're pretty quick, you might have already assessed what the meaning of inhibitory is. But essentially, an inhibitory neurotransmitter decreases the likelihood that the neuron will fire an action potential. So it decreases the chance that that message will carry on through each neuron in the neural chain. Serotonin is actually also an inhibitory neurotransmitter. If we look down here at glutamate, this is an excitatory neurotransmitter. It's involved in memory. And excitatory neurotransmitters increase the likelihood that the neuron will fire an action potential. Some of the major excitatory neurotransmitters are also including here norepinephrine. This is also excitatory. And then we have glutamate, and this is an oversupply, can stimulate the brain producing migraines or seizures. And a lot of people will talk about how MSG is harmful or makes them sick, and that can actually be valid because monosodium glutamate is found in some foods. I think like the American version of Chinese food contains a lot of MSG. There was some hubbub a while back about, and I don't know if this is true or not, so don't quote me, but there was some hubbub there about MSG contained in Panda Express foods, and that was making people have migraines and major health issues. So a lot of people just choose to avoid MSG in general. Okay, so the nervous system is the body's speedy electrochemical communication system. And if we're thinking about all these things together, we're thinking about the brain and the neuron and neurotransmitters and the nervous system. I think of the brain like the boss. So the brain controls everything in this area of psychology we're talking about. It's the area of your body. And the neuron and the neurotransmitters are forms of communication. They're like sending emails out, essentially. That's how quick they go. And the nervous system is just like the system that kind of controls and organizes everything. So it contains all the nerve cells of the peripheral and central nervous systems here. So it's broken down like this. You have your nervous system consists of the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. Central nervous system is simply the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral system is made up of autonomic and skeletal systems. So autonomic controls self-regulated action of internal organs and glands, the heart. and skeletal controls voluntary movements of skeletal muscles. Then if we look here, sympathetic and parasympathetic are part of our autonomic system. The sympathetic is arousing and the parasympathetic is calming. So you might hear fight or flight associated with the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so nerves are just neural cables containing many axons. So these are just like the chains that we drew on with sidewalk chalk outside and how they're all connected. They contain many different axons and they stretch great lengths of your body. They connect the central nervous system with the muscles, glands, and sense organs, and they are part of the peripheral nervous system. Sensory neurons are those that carry incoming information from the sense receptors to the central nervous system. So this is like when you touch a hot, you can look down here at this diagram. When you touch a hot object, the impulse comes in from your finger, you can see the arrow, heads up into through your pain receptors in your skin, into your muscle. The muscle contracts and withdraws the part being stimulated. That's your reaction. You jerk your hand away from, here I guess this person's touching a candle. That's really not very bright. We should all know by then that it's very, very hot. It's easier to maybe touch something you didn't know was hot, like a hot pan or maybe a super hot cup of coffee. So pain travels in through your receptors. Jerk your hand back, the muscles contracted and withdraws your hand. Signal continues up here, moving up into your central nervous system where your brain, your spinal cord and your brain process what's just happened and let you know that you're feeling pain and that you associate that feeling with that action and you don't want to touch that hot thing again. Okay, so interneurons are a part of central nervous system. They are neurons that internally communicate and intervene between the sensory inputs and motor outputs. So sensory input is here in this diagram. We're moving through your nervous system, and I'm not sure what this picture is. I think this is supposed to be thirsty, but the example that I wanted to talk to you about was going back to that touching something hot, where you touch something hot and the sensory comes in through the tips of your fingers, processed by your brain, and tells your body to jerk your hand away. So it tells your muscle to contract and jerk your hand away from the hot candle or the hot cup of coffee or whatever it is that you've touched. The motor neurons carry outgoing information from the central nervous system to muscles and glands. So again, just like that's the message that comes from your brain that tells you to pull your hand away. So it forces your muscle to contract and it jerks your hand away from the hot cup of coffee. The somatic nervous system is a division of the peripheral nervous system that controls the body's skeletal muscles. So if we look here with this box, a red box outlined here, I'm sure many of you have spent time on social media seeing the Ice Bucket Challenge for ALS. And this is a amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, and it's a progressive neurodegenerative disease that affects nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord. Motor neurons reach from the brain to the spinal cord and from the spinal cord to the muscles throughout the body. The progressive degeneration of the motor neurons in ALS eventually leads to their death. When the motor neurons die, the ability of the brain to initiate and control muscle movement is lost. So if you were to touch a hot pot, your body wouldn't be able to process the signal, hey, I've touched something, my pain receptors in my fingers are sending electrical impulses to my brain to tell me, hey, this is hot, this is causing me pain. And then my brain is processing that and sending motor neurons to my muscles, telling my muscles to pull my hand away. So if you have ALS, you're losing the ability to do that. So that's the Ice Bucket Challenge, my friends. The autonomic nervous system is a part of the peripheral nervous system that controls the glands and the muscles of the internal organs, such as the heart. The sympathetic nervous system is a division of the autonomic nervous system that arouses the body, mobilizing its energy in stressful situation. So this might be like the fight or flight you've heard of before, or it tells your body to produce adrenaline, so you're able to have a quicker reaction time. And then the parasympathetic nervous system, on the flip side, is a division of the autonomic nervous system that calms the body, conserving its energy. And we'll dig a little bit more into this next week when we talk about sensation and perception. Have a good evening.